Before history began, before words had names, the earth was cold, and the nights were longer than memory. In the silence of ancient fires, mothers whispered to their sleeping infants, hoping they would wake with the sun, but most never did. Tonight, we travel back to the dawn of humanity, to understand why, in the deep dark of prehistory, 7 out of 10 newborns never saw their first spring. In the belly of the mountain, where shadow clings to stone like memory itself, a mother breathes. Her breath rises in pale wisps, catching the amber light of embers that dance against the cave walls. The fire is small, barely more than a whisper of flame, but it holds back the endless dark that stretches beyond their shelter. Here, in this hollow carved by time and ancient waters, life struggles to emerge once more into a world that has little patience for the tender. She lies on a bed of dried grass and animal hide, her body curved around the great mystery within. The cave smells of smoke and earth, of the wet stone that weeps mineral tears down the walls, of the sage and juniper that the elder women burn when souls cross from one world to another. Her tribe has gathered in the deeper chambers, their voices a low murmur that mingles with the whisper of wind through limestone passages. The mountain itself seems to hold its breath as she labors. Each contraction comes like the tide inevitable, ancient, following rhythms older than memory. Her fingers grip the smooth stone worn gentle by countless other mothers who have lain here before, who have brought forth life in this sacred darkness. Their spirits linger still, she believes, watching from the spaces between firelight and shadow. Pain floods through her like ice water, then recedes, leaving her gasping in the smoky air. The elder woman, her own mother's mother, kneels beside her with hands that know this ritual by heart. Those weathered fingers have caught many babies as they slipped from the warm, dark into the cold light of existence. Most grew strong, many did not. The old woman's eyes hold this knowledge like stones worn smooth by sorrow. Time moves differently here in the mountain's heart. The fire burns lower, casting longer shadows that dance like ancestral spirits on the cave walls. The world beyond might be day or night in this place. Only the flame marks the passage of moments. Hours drift by like smoke, marked only by the rhythm of labor, the quiet encouragements of the elder, the distant sounds of the tribe preparing for whatever comes. Then, in a rush of breath and blood and ancient waters, the child arrives. The first cry splits the cave's silence like lightning, a sound so pure, so fierce, that even the mountain seems to pause in wonder. It is the voice of possibility itself, demanding air, demanding warmth, demanding its place in a world that offers no promises. The elder woman catches the tiny form in her cupped palms, this miracle no larger than a raven, slick with the waters of becoming. The mother reaches with trembling hands as the baby is placed upon her chest. Skin touches skin, and something deeper than warmth passes between them, the oldest conversation, conducted without words. The child's eyes, dark as cave pools, seem to hold the light of stars she has never seen. In this moment, she is perfect. In this moment, she is infinite. In this moment, she is enough to fill every shadow in the cave with hope. The elder woman tends to the cord that connected mother and child, cutting it with a blade of napped obsidian that reflects the firelight like captured stars. She wraps the baby in soft doeskin, worn to silk by careful hands, and whispers the ancient words that welcome new souls to the tribe. But even as she speaks the blessings, her eyes carry the weight of what she knows, what she has seen too many times in the cycles of seasons that have marked her long life. The fire burns on, as it has burned in this cave for generations, beyond counting. It will burn after this night passes into memory. It will burn for other mothers, other children, other moments when hope and sorrow dance together in the amber light. The flames consume dry wood slowly, carefully, making each piece last for fuel is precious, and the long night is always longer than expected. Outside, the world waits with all its beauties and terrors. The great herds that thunder across endless grasslands, the rivers that sing their way to distant seas, the storms that reshape the landscape with wind and water, the predators that hunt in silence. The changing seasons that bring abundance and famine in their turning. The thousand small dangers that wait for the unwary, the unlucky, the unprepared. But here, in this moment suspended between heartbeats, there is only love. Only the mother's hands learning the contours of her daughter's face. Only the baby's tiny fingers grasping at the edge of dreams. Only the fire painting its gentle light on stone. Walls that have witnessed this scene countless times, this first meeting between hope and the world. The elder woman banks the fire with practiced movements, preserving the coals for the long night ahead. She has delivered 43 babies in this cave over the seasons of her life. She has watched 28 of them grow to see their first summer. She has helped bury 15 beneath stones marked with ochre handprints. Their brief songs joined to the eternal silence that holds all songs. These numbers live in her bones like scars, but they do not make her bitter. They make her fierce, with tenderness, desperate, with love for each new life that slips into her weathered hands. For she knows what the young mother cannot yet understand, what the peaceful baby cannot yet imagine. In the caves where children are born, and in the places where they are remembered, life writes its story, not in certainty, but in the courage to begin again. Each birth is both a victory and a gamble, with forces too vast for human understanding. Each child carries the full weight of their ancestors' hopes and the full fragility of their own mortality. But tonight, in the warm circle of firelight, none of that matters. Tonight there is only this: a mother's love, a baby's breath, and the ancient promise that some stories, the ones worth telling, always begin the same way, with a cry that cuts through darkness, with hands that reach for light, with hope that refuses to count the odds. When morning comes to the mountain, it brings with it the vast theater of the world. The mother emerges from the cave with her daughter bundled against her chest, blinking in the pale light that spills across the endless grasslands. Above them, the sky stretches like a great blue hide, unmarked by anything human, no trails of metal birds, no geometric scars, no haze of distant cities. Only the eternal dome of heaven, vast and clean and utterly indifferent to the small drama of survival playing out beneath its canopy. Here, where the mountain meets the plain, the scale of existence becomes clear. The landscape rolls away in waves of golden grass, punctuated by distant groves of trees that mark the passage of hidden streams. Herds of massive shapes move like shadows across the far horizon: aurochs and giant elk, bison and horse, following paths worn by 10,000 generations of their kind. Their breath rises in the cool air like prayers, small clouds that dissipate before reaching the watching sky. The baby sleeps against her mother's heartbeat, unaware that she has been born into a world where every breath is borrowed, every day a negotiation with forces beyond comprehension. Her tiny lungs draw in air that carries the scent of wild herbs and distant rain, of wood smoke and wet earth, of the great breathing of a planet still learning its own name. She dreams, perhaps, of the warm darkness she has left behind, not yet knowing that she has traded perfect safety for the terrible gift of possibility. The mother walks slowly down the mountain path, her feet finding the worn stones that countless others have used before her. Each step connects her to the long chain of mothers who have made this same journey from the safety of birth caves to the dangerous abundance of the world below. Her legs still ache from labor, but the morning calls to her with its promise of sun warmth and fresh water, of the berries that grow wild near the stream, of the roots that can be dug when the baby sleeps. The sky watches everything with its deep blue eye, holding the sun like a golden coin against its endless face. Clouds gather and scatter in patterns that tell stories to those who know how to read them, stories of weather coming from the distant seas, of storms building beyond the edge of sight, of the patient turning of seasons that governs all life on the grasslands. The baby's mother cannot read these signs as well as her elders, but she feels their weight, the way that light holds hints of change, the way the wind carries promises and warnings in equal measure. Below them, the world spreads out like a vast feeding ground for giants. The grasses wave in the morning breeze, heavy with seed, supporting an ecosystem so rich it seems impossible that anything could go hungry here. Yet, the mother knows better. She has lived through the lean times when the herds moved on, when the rains failed, when winter came early and stayed too long. She has seen children grow thin, has watched the light fade from eyes too young to understand why their bellies stayed empty, despite their tears. A hawk circles high overhead, riding the thermals that rise from the warming earth. Its cry pierces the morning like a needle, sharp and wild and free. The baby stirs at the sound, her dark eyes opening to catch the play of light and shadow above. For a moment, mother and daughter both look up at the soaring bird, sharing their first glimpse of the sky's dominion together. The hawk sees them as specks on the landscape, two more creatures in the endless parade of life that struggles across the grasslands, no more significant than the mice that hide in the grain, or the flowers that bloom and fade with the seasons. But significance, the mother thinks as she watches the hawk spiral higher, is not something the sky grants. It is something the heart creates in its fierce refusal to be forgotten. Every child born is the universe making itself conscious, if only for a span of years as brief as lightning. Every breath taken is an act of defiance against the patient stones, the watching stars, the vast indifference of space and time. The path leads down to a stream that chatters over rounded stones, its voice bright and constant in the morning air. Here, willows trail their fingers in the current, creating pools of shade where small fish dart like silver thoughts. The mother kneels carefully at the water's edge, cupping the cold stream in her hands to drink. The baby watches the play of light on water with eyes that are just learning to focus, just beginning to understand the difference between darkness and illumination, between the warmth of skin and the coolness of air. Other women from the tribe have come down from the mountain caves, carrying their own children, their own hopes, their own weight of love and fear. They gather at the stream like flowers seeking light, their voices mingling with the water's song. Some carry infants like hers, new lives wrapped in soft hide and fierce protection. Others have older children who splash in the shallows, their laughter bright as birdsong. Still others have only the memory of children in their eyes, the hollow ache that comes when small hands no longer reach for comfort. The grandmother of the tribe, bent with years but still strong, approaches the new mother with slow, careful steps. Her face is marked by decades of weather and worry, but her eyes hold the deep kindness that comes from having survived long enough to understand what truly matters. She looks down at the sleeping baby with an expression that holds both joy and something heavier, the knowledge that love and loss are woven together like grass into baskets, inseparable and necessary. She is beautiful, the grandmother says, her voice like wind through dry leaves. She is strong. I can see it in the way she holds her head, the way her fingers grasp. But her words carry undertones, meanings that float beneath the surface like fish beneath ice. She has said these words before, many times, to many mothers. Sometimes they proved true. Sometimes they became prayers, offered to the patient earth. The young mother nods, understanding both the blessing and the warning in the elder's words. She pulls the baby closer, feeling the warmth of the small body against her chest, the flutter of heartbeat against heartbeat. Around them, the morning continues. Its ancient dance, the hawk still circles, the stream still sings, the grass still bends before the wandering wind. The world offers no promises, makes no bargains, grants no special favor to human hopes. Yet here they are, these fragile sparks of consciousness, these brief candles lit against the enormous darkness. Here they are with their loves and fears, their milk and tears, their desperate tenderness for lives that may last decades or mere days. The sky watches them all with equal attention, which is to say, with none at all. But they watch each other, and in that watching, in that fierce attention to each precious moment, they create something the sky cannot. They create meaning. The baby opens her eyes again, looking up at the vast blue dome above them. In her gaze is no fear, no understanding of vulnerability, no knowledge of the countless ways a small life can fail. There is only wonder at the light, curiosity about the world she has been given, and the deep trust that the warmth holding her will always be there. It is a trust that will be tested in ways she cannot imagine, a wonder that will be tempered by truths too hard for morning to hold. But that is for tomorrow, and the day after, and all the tomorrows that stretch ahead like an uncertain path through tall grass. For now, there is only this: the stream singing its eternal song, the hawk writing its story on the wind, and the fragile, impossible miracle of love, learning to see itself reflected in a pair of dark eyes. Above them all, the sky continues its patient watching, holding clouds and sun, storm and calm, within its endless embrace. It has seen 1 billion births, 1 billion deaths, 1 billion small dramas of hope and heartbreak played out on the stage of Earth. It will see 1 billion more. But for each mother, holding each child, this moment is unique, unrepeatable, infinite in its importance. The morning light grows stronger, promising a day of warmth and possibility. The grasslands stretch away toward horizons that hold mysteries yet to be discovered. And in the midst of it all, love continues its ancient work, creating significance in an indifferent universe, one heartbeat at a time. When darkness comes to the grasslands, it comes complete. There are no gradual streetlights here, no warm yellow squares of windows to puncture the advancing night. The sun simply falls behind the western hills like a stone dropped into deep water, taking with it all the warmth and certainty of day. In its place rises a darkness so profound it seems to have weight pressing down on the shoulders of anyone foolish enough to venture beyond the sacred circle of firelight. The tribe gathers as they have gathered for countless generations, in the space between the mountain caves and the open plain, where their fires can burn bright without being smothered by stone walls. The flames leap and dance, fed by dry wood carefully collected during the day's wandering. Each stick is precious, each branch hoarded against the long hours until dawn. The fire is more than light, more than warmth. It is the boundary between the human world and everything else that owns the night. The mother sits with her baby cradled against her chest, feeling the heat of the flames on her face while the night air cools her back. Around the fire, 23 souls make their temporary claim against the darkness, men returning from the day's hunt, with empty hands more often than full, women with gathering baskets that hold the patient treasures of root and berry, children who have not yet learned to fear the sounds that rustle in the grass beyond the light. But the adults know, the elders remember, and in the way they position themselves around the fire, in the glances they cast toward the darkness, in the stories they tell and the songs they sing, they pass down the knowledge that has kept their people alive through generations of dangerous nights. The grandmother tends the fire with movements that speak of ritual. Each log is placed precisely, each ember coaxed back to flame with practiced breath. She knows the moods of fire as intimately as she knows the moods of the sky, when it wants to burn bright and fast, when it prefers to smolder and last, when it grows hungry for fresh wood or content to feed on its own heat. The fire is a living thing in her hands, a creature that must be courted and convinced to stay through the dark hours. Tell them about the spirits, the mother whispers to the old woman, nodding toward the children who lean forward in the flickering light, their faces painted gold and red by the dancing flames. The grandmother's eyes crinkle with understanding. This too is part of the ritual, the stories that explain what cannot be explained, that give names to the nameless fears that prowl beyond the circle of light. Long ago, the grandmother begins, her voice taking on the cadence that marks sacred words. Before your mothers drew breath, the spirits walked openly in the daylight. They were not enemies then, not hunters of human souls. They were teachers, guides, the voices that whispered warnings when the herds moved or storms gathered. But something changed in the turning of seasons. Something made them hungry for the warmth that lives only in beating hearts. The children press closer to their mothers, but their eyes remain fixed on the storyteller's face. They have heard variations of this story before, but each telling reveals new details, new warnings, new protections against the dark. The baby sleeps through the words, her breath so soft it barely disturbs the air. But even in sleep she seems to sense the gravity of what is being shared, the knowledge that will one day keep her alive, if she is strong enough, lucky enough, loved enough to survive long enough to use it. Now they come only in darkness, the grandmother continues, drawn by the scent of milk and the sound of breathing. They cannot cross running water. They cannot touch what has been blessed with ochre and sage. They cannot enter where iron has been buried in the earth. She gestures to the small pieces of meteoric iron that hang from cords around the necks of the tribe members. dark metal that fell from the sky and carries the power of stars. But for all the protections, for all the rituals and warnings, the real defense is simpler and more fragile than any talisman. It is the fire itself, the circle of light that creates a world small enough to protect, warm enough to sustain life through the long hours until dawn. Beyond that circle, anything might wait: the great cats that hunt in silence, the bears that can tear through hide shelters like mist, the wolves that sing their hunger to the indifferent stars. As if summoned by the story, a wolf's call drifts across the grasslands from somewhere beyond the reach of firelight. The sound is both beautiful and terrible, pure, loneliness, given voice, wild freedom, singing its ancient song. The tribe falls silent, listening as other voices join the chorus, first, creating a chorus that speaks of pack bond and predator need, of the hunt that never ends and the hunger that never sleeps. The mother's arms tighten around her baby, an instinctive response that needs no thought. She knows, as every mother knows, that the wolves are not singing for joy. They are calling to each other across the dark miles, coordinating their movements, sharing information about scents and sounds and opportunities. And among those opportunities, the warm smell of human settlement carries with it the promise of easier prey than the fleet-footed deer or the dangerous bison. The grandmother throws another branch onto the fire, sending fresh sparks spiraling upward toward the star-scattered sky. Fire keeps them honest, she says quietly, her voice carrying the weight of experience. Makes them remember that we too are hunters, that we too have teeth. But even as she speaks, her eyes scan the darkness beyond the flames, searching for the glint of reflected light that might betray watching eyes. The men of the tribe check their spears, running weathered fingers along stone points that have been shaped with infinite patience, bound to wooden shafts with sinew and bark cord. The weapons are beautiful in their simplicity, deadly in their purpose, extensions of human will projected into the darkness that threatens everything they love. But everyone knows that spears are only as strong as the arms that hold them. And even the strongest arm grows tired. Even the sharpest point can be turned aside by thick hide or bad luck. A baby cries somewhere in the circle, not the mother's child, but another family's newest arrival. The sound cuts through the night like a blade, sharp and demanding, and utterly human. For a moment, the entire tribe tenses, listening not just to the baby's distress, but to the way the darkness beyond the firelight seems to hold its breath, as if every predator within miles has suddenly pricked up its ears at the sound of vulnerability made audible. The crying baby's mother quickly draws him to her breast, offering the comfort that stops the sound almost immediately. But the damage is done. The location of the camp has been announced to everything that hunts in the darkness. The presence of the most helpless members of the tribe, declared to any creature with the patience to wait and the cunning to strike when the fire burns low. This is the paradox that haunts every parent in this harsh world. The children, who are the future of the tribe, are also its greatest vulnerability. Their cries call for protection, but also bring danger. Their small bodies need constant warmth but consume precious fuel. Their needs are immediate and absolute, but the resources to meet those needs are always uncertain, always threatened by forces beyond human control. The mother looks down at her own sleeping daughter, marveling at the peaceful expression on the tiny face. In sleep, the baby looks almost otherworldly too, perfect for this rough world, too delicate for the struggles that await. But she is here now, breathing the smoky air, her heart beating its steady rhythm against her mother's chest. Each moment she survives is a victory against odds that would have daunted gods. As the night deepens, the tribe begins the slow process of preparing for sleep. Some will stay awake to tend the fire. They take turns throughout the night, ensuring that the flames never die completely, that the circle of protection never fails. Others gather their children close, wrapping them in hides and holding them against the warmth of their own bodies, creating small islands of safety in the vast ocean of darkness. The grandmother banks the main fire carefully, preserving coals that will kindle tomorrow's flames. Her movements are economical, practiced, the gestures of someone who has kept fire alive through thousands of nights. She knows that tomorrow will bring its own challenges: the search for food, the need for water, the constant awareness of weather and season, and the great migrations that govern life on the grasslands. But tonight, there is only this: the circle of light, the warmth of bodies pressed close together, the soft breathing of children who trust that the adults will keep the darkness at bay. It is a trust both terrible and beautiful. Terrible, because it cannot always be honored. Beautiful, because it exists at all in a world that offers no guarantees. In the distance, the wolves sing again, their voices weaving through the night air like smoke through starlight. But closer, within the sacred circle of the fire, love keeps its own vigil, fierce, protective, desperate in its tenderness. The baby sleeps on, unaware that her survival depends on the strength of arms that hold her, the wisdom of voices that plan for tomorrow, the courage of hearts that refuse to let the darkness have the final word. The fire burns lower but does not die. The night grows deeper but does not triumph. And in the space between flame and shadow, hope tends its own small light, fragile as breath, persistent as heartbeat, bright enough to last until dawn. In the pale hour before dawn, when the fire has burned to glowing coals and the darkness begins its slow retreat, the baby wakes with hunger. Her cry is small at first, a whisper of need that rises from sleep like mist from water. But hunger, once awakened, grows quickly in the tiny body that has known only the warmth of the womb and the safety of her mother's arms. The cry builds, becomes insistent, demands the one thing that can satisfy the deep ache that has blossomed in her belly like a dark flower. The mother stirs from her own light sleep, feeling the baby's distress before she fully hears it. This is the new language she is learning, the vocabulary of needs, expressed through sound and movement, the grammar of care that requires no words. Her body responds before her mind fully awakens, breast growing heavy with the milk that her child requires, arms adjusting to bring the baby closer to the source of comfort. In the grey light that seeps across the grasslands, the mother looks down at her daughter's face as she nurses. The baby's eyes are closed in concentration, her tiny fists opening and closing against her mother's skin with each pull of milk. There is something almost sacred in this moment, the perfect matching of need and fulfillment, the way the baby's hunger draws life from her mother's body, as naturally as flowers draw water from rain. But even as she feels the sweet tug of nursing, the mother is aware of the hollow ache in her own belly. She has eaten little in the past days, a handful of nuts gathered yesterday, some bitter roots dug from the earth near the stream, a thin piece of meat from the rabbit one of the hunters managed to bring down. The tribe's stores are low, as they often are in the season before the great herds return, before the berry bushes ripen, before the earth offers up its abundance to those patient enough to search. Around the dying fire, other mothers face the same quiet struggle. Bodies that must make milk from their own substance, drawing on reserves of fat and bone and blood to feed the children who depend on them. Some of the women show the signs of this sacrifice: the hollow cheeks, the slow movements, the way their clothes hang loose on frames that have given too much for too long. Yet they continue, as mothers have always continued, offering their own life force to ensure the next generation has its chance to survive. The grandmother moves among the mothers, like a priestess tending a sacred ritual. Her own breasts dried up decades ago, but her hands still remember the motions of comfort, the gentle touches that ease the soreness that comes with nursing, the wisdom of positioning that helps milk flow more freely. She carries with her small bundles of herbs, red clover, to encourage milk production, fennel, to ease the baby's digestion, willow, bark to reduce the ache that seems to live in every mother's bones. Drink this, she whispers to the young mother, offering a cup made from hollowed gourd filled with tea that steams in the cool morning air. The liquid is bitter but warming, carrying the concentrated essence of plants that have fed mothers since the beginning of human time. The grandmother's eyes are kind, but knowing she has seen what happens when mothers cannot produce enough milk, when babies fade, despite all the love and care their families can provide. The baby nurses greedily, her small throat working with each swallow. But even as her immediate hunger is satisfied, larger hungers circle the tribe like wolves at the edge of firelight. The hunger for meat that would give the mothers strength, the hunger for roots and berries that would fill the aching bellies of children too young to hunt, too small to gather for themselves. The hunger for fat and marrow that would carry them through the lean times that always come, predictable as winter, inevitable as death. The men prepare for another day of hunting, checking their spears and studying the morning sky for signs of weather. Their own hunger is sharp. They cannot hunt well on empty stomachs, cannot track game for hours across difficult terrain without the fuel their bodies need. But they will try anyway, because that is what hunters do. They will range far from the camp, following trails that may lead to abundance, or may lead only to exhaustion and empty hands. Some will seek the great herds that migrate across the grasslands, bison and elk, whose meat could feed the entire tribe for days, whose hides could provide warmth and shelter, whose bones could be shaped into tools and weapons. But the herds are unpredictable, following paths known only to themselves, responding to instincts older than human memory. A tribe can wait weeks for the thunder of hooves on the horizon, can track the signs of passage only to find that the animals have already moved on, following grass and water to places beyond human reach. Others will hunt smaller game, the rabbits and ground birds that hide in the tall grass, the fish that swim in the streams, the eggs that can be gathered from nests if one is quiet enough, quick enough, lucky enough to find them before other creatures do. This hunting requires infinite patience, sharp eyes, the ability to move without sound through landscape that conceals both predator and prey. The rewards are smaller, but more reliable. A rabbit caught today will feed one family tonight, even if it cannot solve the larger problem of sustained hunger. The mother shifts the baby to her other breast, feeling the familiar ache as milk lets down once again. Her body is still learning this new rhythm, still adjusting to the constant demand for nourishment that nursing requires. She thinks of the food she will need today, the calories that must come from somewhere to replace what she gives to her daughter, the sustenance that will allow her milk to continue flowing. But food is never certain, never guaranteed. It must be found, caught, gathered, prepared. And all of that requires strength, time, and luck. The women who are not nursing prepare for their own daily journey, the search for plant foods that make up the bulk of the tribe's diet. They know which roots are sweet and which are bitter, which leaves can be eaten raw and which must be cooked to remove their poison, which barks can be chewed for their medicine, and which will bring only sickness. This knowledge has been passed down through generations of careful teaching, learned through seasons of plenty and famine, paid for with the lives of those who guessed wrong about what was safe to eat. Today they will range across the grasslands with their gathering baskets, eyes scanning the ground for the subtle signs that mark edible plants. The work is hard bending and digging for hours under the sun, carrying heavy loads back to camp, processing tough roots and bitter greens into something that can nourish the children. But it is also essential. Plants provide the steady foundation of calories that keeps the tribe alive between successful hunts, the reliable nutrition that allows mothers to make milk and children to grow. As the sun climbs higher, painting the grasslands with golden light, the camp empties, except for the mothers with the youngest babies. The elders too frail for long journeys, and the children too small to be useful in the day's work. They create their own smaller circle of protection around the banked fire, tending the flames that will welcome the others back at evening, watching over the most vulnerable members of the tribe. The baby sleeps again, her belly full for now, her small body warm against her mother's chest. But the mother cannot sleep. Her mind moves restlessly over the concerns that never leave her: the need for food, the signs of weather, the constant calculation of resources against time. She thinks of winter, still months away but already casting its shadow over every decision. Will there be enough fat stored to keep them warm? Enough dried meat to sustain them when fresh game is scarce? Enough milk in her breasts to feed her daughter through the hungry months? These questions have no easy answers. The future remains as unknowable as ever, as uncertain as the weather, as unpredictable as the great herds whose movements govern so much of the tribe's fate. All a mother can do is love fiercely, plan carefully, and hope that the delicate balance between need and fulfillment will hold for one more day, one more season, one more turn of the wheel that carries all life forward through time. The baby stirs against her chest, making the small sounds that precede waking. Soon she will be hungry again, will need the milk that must somehow continue to flow despite the mother's own emptiness. It is a demand that cannot be negotiated with, cannot be postponed, cannot be satisfied with anything else. The breast must give what the baby needs, drawing on whatever reserves remain, borrowing against tomorrow's strength to meet today's requirements. In the distance, smoke rises from other camps, scattered across the vast grasslands, other tribes facing the same daily struggle. The same balance between love and hunger, between hope and the harsh mathematics of survival. Each column of smoke marks another group of humans who have chosen to continue, to bring children into an uncertain world, to invest their lives in the possibility of tomorrow, despite all evidence that tomorrow offers no guarantees. The mother adjusts her hold on the baby, feeling the weight of responsibility that comes with love. This small life depends entirely on her ability to transform her own substance into sustenance, her own strength into protection, her own hope into the foundation for another generation's survival. It is a burden both terrible and beautiful, a responsibility that connects her to every mother who has ever lived, who has ever faced the ancient challenge of keeping love alive in a world that offers no promises. The fire burns lower, but does not die. The baby sleeps, but will wake again in hunger. The mother watches but cannot see the future. And in the space between breath and breath, between heartbeat and heartbeat, life continues its patient work of transforming hope into tomorrow, one drop of milk at a time. When the moon rises full over the grasslands, casting its silver light across the sea of grass, the grandmother calls for the counting. It is an old ritual, older than the oldest stories, practiced by the tribe when the hunting has been poor and bellies stay empty, despite the day's searching. When the shadows grow longer and hope grows thinner, the people gather to remember those who have walked before them, not to mourn, for grief is a luxury they cannot afford, but to honor the lives that have made their own survival possible. The mother sits close to the fire with her baby sleeping against her shoulder, listening as the grandmother's voice rises and falls like wind through dry grass. Around the circle, faces glow in the firelight, some young, some weathered by seasons, all marked by the particular tenderness that comes from living close to loss, from loving in the face of uncertainty. We count them not by names, the grandmother begins, her words following the ancient pattern, for names are for the living, and the dead have moved beyond the need for calling. We count them by the gifts they left behind, the breath shared, the wisdom given, the love that outlasts the body that held it. She reaches into a leather pouch that hangs at her waist and draws out a handful of small stones, each one smooth and dark, polished by countless hands over countless seasons. These are the memory stones, gathered from sacred places, held through vigils, passed down through generations of keepers who understand their purpose. Each stone represents not a death, but a life that mattered, a soul that contributed something essential to the continuing story of the tribe. 7 stones for the children who came to us in the season of the great rains, the grandmother says, placing each stone with deliberate care on the earth before the fire. They taught us that love is not measured in length of days, but in depth of feeling. Their spirits joined the thunder that brings the waters we need, the lightning that splits the sky, to let the rain fall down. The mother feels her arms tighten around her baby, an instinctive response to words that speak of children who did not survive their first season. She tries to imagine those 7 mothers, sitting perhaps where she sits now, holding babies who seemed as healthy and hopeful as her own daughter. She tries to imagine their faces when the fever came, when the coughing started, when the small bodies grew still, despite all the desperate love that surrounded them. 3 stones for the babies who were born in winter's heart. The grandmother continues, when the snow lay deep and the hunting was poor. They came to us like seeds planted in frozen ground, too early for the earth to warm them, but they showed us the preciousness of each breath, the miracle of each heartbeat. Their spirits became the stars that guide us through the darkest nights. More stones join the growing circle on the ground. Each placement is accompanied by silence, by the soft sound of breath drawn by those who remember, who knew the children being honored, who held them briefly in their arms, before releasing them to whatever comes after life. The ritual is not sorrowful. There is no wailing, no tearing of clothes, no dramatic expression of grief. Instead, there is a quiet dignity, a recognition that this too is part of the pattern, part of the way life moves through the world. The baby in the mother's arms stirs slightly, her tiny face peaceful in sleep. She seems to sense the solemnity of the moment, even in her dreams, her breathing slow and steady against her mother's chest. The mother finds herself counting those breaths, treasuring each one, aware as never before of how fragile the gift of life truly is. Each exhalation could be the last. Each small movement, a farewell to the world that has welcomed her so recently. 5 stones for those who lived to see their first summer, but could not find strength for their first winter. The grandmother's voice continues, never wavering, never hurrying. They knew the warmth of sun on their faces, the sweetness of berries on their tongues, the joy of laughter shared with their mothers. Their spirits live in the warm winds that bring the spring, in the first flowers that push through the snow. Around the circle, other women nod in recognition. They know these stories, have lived them, have watched their own children slip away despite all their care and love. But there is no bitterness in their faces, no rage at the unfairness of a world that takes babies before they have a chance to become people. Instead, there is acceptance, not passive resignation, but the active choice to find meaning in what seems meaningless, to discover purpose in pain. 2 stones for the children who grew strong and tall, but were taken by the spotted sickness that swept through the grasslands like fire through dry grass. The grandmother's voice grows softer now, speaking of losses that cut deeper, because they came after hope had been allowed to grow, after parents had begun to believe their children might actually survive to adulthood. The mother thinks of her own childhood, of the friends who played beside her in the grass, until the day they simply did not rise from their sleeping furs. She remembers her own mother's face during that terrible season, the way she watched her surviving daughter with eyes that seemed to see death lurking in every shadow, the fear that comes with loving something that can be lost so easily, so completely, so suddenly. 4 stones for the ones who left us when the river rose and swept away our winter camp, the grandmother says, her voice carrying the weight of that remembered disaster. They rode the waters to the spirit world, became part of the great flow that brings life to all the grasslands. When we drink from any stream, we taste their essence. When rain falls on our faces, we feel their blessing. The counting continues as the moon climbs higher in the star-scattered sky. Stone after stone is placed on the earth, each one representing a life that was precious, despite its brevity, a soul that mattered, despite its small impact on the world. The circle of stones grows slowly, deliberately, creating a spiral pattern that speaks of cycles, of continuation, of the way endings become beginnings in the eternal dance of existence. Finally, the last stone is set in place, completing the spiral that glows in the firelight like a galaxy made of earth and memory. The grandmother sits back on her heels, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her eyes reflecting the flames that have witnessed this ceremony countless times before. Around the circle, the tribe sits in contemplative silence, each person lost in their own memories, their own fears, their own desperate hopes for the children sleeping in their arms. They are not gone, the grandmother says, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the still night air. They are the wind that cools us in summer's heat. They are the warmth that finds us in winter's cold. They are the strength in our arms when we lift our living children. They are the wisdom in our hearts when we make choices that keep the tribe alive. The mother looks down at her sleeping daughter, seeing in the tiny face all the possibility in the world, the chance for laughter and love, for discovery and growth, for a life that might last long enough to matter in ways no one can predict. But she also sees the fragility, the countless ways this precious life could be lost, despite all her care and protection. It is a truth too heavy for the heart to carry alone, too vast for any single parent to bear. But she is not alone. Around her sit women who have faced the same fears, who have lost children and survived the loss, who have learned to love again despite knowing that love opens the heart to grief. They form their own circle, their own protection against the darkness that threatens all life. In their shared vigil, their common understanding, their mutual support, They create something stronger than any individual courage. The stones remember, the grandmother says, beginning the ritual's conclusion. The earth remembers, the wind remembers, and we remember. In our remembering, they live. In our loving, they continue. In our hope for tomorrow, they plant the seeds of futures they will never see. One by one, the memory stones are gathered up and returned to the sacred pouch. The spiral dissolves back into individual elements, but the pattern remains in the minds of those who witnessed its creation. The children who were honored have returned to the mystery from which all life emerges, but their brief presence has left marks on the world in the hearts of parents who loved them, in the wisdom of elders who tended them, in the strengthened resolve of a tribe that refuses to let loss diminish its commitment to life. The baby wakes with a soft cry, hungry again, needing the milk that her mother's body produces despite her own emptiness. As she nurses in the firelight, surrounded by the quiet conversations of the tribe, the mother whispers a prayer that has no words, a fierce intention that this child will be strong enough, lucky enough, loved enough to survive all the dangers that wait in tomorrow's shadows. But even as she prays, she knows that some things are beyond prayer, beyond love, beyond the reach of human will. She knows that her daughter might join the memory stones, someday, might become part of the counting that honors lives too brief to measure, but too precious to forget. The knowledge sits in her heart like a stone, cold and heavy and undeniable. Yet, she continues to love, continues to hope, continues to offer her body, her strength, her life force to this small being who depends on her for everything. Because that is what mothers do, what they have always done. They choose love, despite its cost, hope, despite its uncertainty, life, despite its fragility. The fire burns lower, but does not die. The baby feeds and sleeps again. The mother watches and worries and loves with the fierce tenderness of those who know that every moment is borrowed, every breath, a gift, every heartbeat, a small victory against the patient darkness that waits for all living things. In the distance, wolves sing their ancient song of hunger and longing. But closer, within the sacred circle of the fire, love keeps its own vigil, counting not stones but heartbeats, not losses but possibilities, not endings, but the endless courage to begin again, one breath at a time. They did not know history, but they knew heartbreak. They did not know the future, but they knew hope. And in the space between heartbreak and hope, they created something that could survive the counting of spirits, the passing of seasons, the great wheel of time that carries all stories forward into mystery. In the darkest hour before dawn, when the mind drifts between waking and sleeping, between memory and vision, the mother dreams. She stands again at the edge of the great grassland, but it is not the grassland of day. This is a place where earth meets sky without horizon, where the amber grasses stretch endlessly upward until they become stars themselves. The light here comes from no sun. She knows it flows like honey through the air, casting no shadows, creating warmth without fire. Her daughter walks beside her, not the infant who never learned to crawl, never spoke her first word, never took her first step across the cave floor. This is the child who might have been walking upright on legs, strong as saplings, her hair flowing like dark water in a wind that smells of flowers that bloom only in dreams. She is perhaps 3 summers old, the age she would have reached if the fever had not taken her, if the winter had been gentler, if love alone could have been enough to keep breath flowing in the tiny chest. The dream child turns to look at her mother with eyes that hold the depth of night skies. She speaks without words, in the language that exists before language, the communication that passes between souls who have shared the same blood, the same heartbeat, the same hopes. I am not gone, the child says without speaking. I am where the grass meets the stars. The mother tries to reach for her, but her arms move as if through water, slow and weighted with the density of sorrow. Around them, the grassland sways in rhythm with breathing, not her breathing, but something larger, the respiration of the world itself. Each blade of grass pulses with its own inner light, and she understands somehow that each one represents a life, a story, a love that has touched the earth, however briefly. In the waking world, her body lies curled on the cave floor beside the banked fire, but her sleeping mind walks in this place between places. The tribe believes that sleep is when the soul travels, when it visits the lands of spirits and ancestors, when the dead can speak to the living without the barriers that daylight creates. They have no words for the chemistry of sleep, for the way the brain processes trauma through dreams, for the melatonin that guides consciousness into its nightly journey through memory and imagination. But they know that dreams tell truths that waking cannot hold. The dream child begins to dance, her small feet barely touching the luminous ground. Other children emerge from the grassland shadow figures at first, then, gaining substance as they move closer. The mother recognizes some of them. Her sister's son, who lived only 7 days. The twin boys from the family across the valley, who were taken by the same fever that claimed her daughter. The girl with the bright laugh, who fell into the river and was carried away by the spring floods. They dance together in the honey light, their movements forming patterns that speak of joy beyond earthly understanding. There is no sadness here, no sense of loss or incompleteness. They move with the freedom of spirits who have shed the weight of flesh, who no longer need breath or food or shelter, who exist now as pure essence in a realm where love is the only law. The mother watches, and slowly, the terrible ache in her chest begins to ease. For months, since her daughter's death, she has carried a pain so profound it seemed to hollow out her bones, leaving her a shell of herself. She has gone through the motions of daily life, gathering food, tending fire, caring for the tribe's remaining children, but always with the sense that part of her soul had been torn away, buried with the small body, beneath the stones marked with ochre handprints. Now, in this place that exists only in sleep, she begins to understand something that her waking mind could never grasp. Her daughter is not lost. She has simply moved to a different way of being, like water that becomes mist, like fire that becomes light, like seeds that disappear into earth, only to emerge as new growth when the season is right. The dream child stops dancing and comes to stand before her mother. She is so close now that the mother can smell the sweetness of her hair, can see the faint pattern of freckles across her nose that she had inherited from her grandmother. But when she reaches out to touch, her hand passes through the child like she is made of starlight and memory. "Do not grieve for where I am," the child's voice whispers in the mother's mind. "Grieve only that you cannot. See it clearly, while you still wear flesh. I am in the wind that dries your tears. I am in the warmth of the fire when the night grows cold. I am in the songs the other mothers sing to their babies, teaching them that love is stronger than the body that holds it." Around them, the grassland begins to fade as dawn approaches in the waking world. The other children wave farewell, their forms becoming translucent, merging back into the light that flows through everything. But before the vision dissolves completely, the mother sees something that will change her forever. She sees the vast network of connection that links all living things, threads of light stretching between every parent and child, every heart that has ever loved another. The threads do not break when death comes. They simply stretch across dimensions, connecting the world of flesh to the world of spirit, allowing love to flow both ways across the boundary between life and whatever comes after. Her daughter is not alone in that place of light. She is surrounded by grandmothers and great-grandmothers, by all the children who have ever died too young, by the infinite community of souls who watch over the living with patience and compassion. They form a constellation of care, a galaxy of love that holds the universe together with invisible bonds, stronger than any force known to the world of matter. The mother wakes as the first grey light of dawn seeps through the cave opening. For a moment, she lies still, holding on to the fading images of the dream. Already the details are beginning to blur, as dreams do, but the feeling remains a sense of connection, of continuation, of hope that exists beyond the reach of death. She sits up slowly, looking across the cave at the other sleeping forms of her tribe. How many of them have walked in similar dreams? How many have received visits from children who live now only in the realm of spirit? She thinks of the grandmother, who speaks sometimes of conversations with her own lost babies, who claims to hear their voices in the wind that moves through the grass. Perhaps this is how belief begins, not with grand revelations or burning bushes, but with the simple human need to maintain connection with those we love beyond the moment when their breath stops. Perhaps the first religion was not worship of gods or goddesses, but the recognition that love itself is sacred, eternal, unbreakable, even by death. The mother rises and goes to tend the fire, adding dry wood to the glowing coals. As the flames spring to life, she thinks of her daughter dancing in the honey light, free from pain, surrounded by joy. The grief is still there, it will always be there, woven into the fabric of her being like a scar through healthy flesh. But alongside it now is something else. A certainty that death is not an ending, but a transformation. Not a wall, but a doorway. Not a goodbye, but a until we meet again. She begins to hum softly as she works, a melody that came to her in the dream. It is a song without words, a tune that speaks of journeys from one world to another, of children who become stars, of love that outlasts the bodies that contain it. The sound drifts through the cave, and gradually, other women begin to stir, drawn by the strange comfort in that wordless lullaby. They do not ask her about the dream. They know, from the peace in her face, that she has traveled to the place where children dance in light. They have been there too, in their own journeys, through sleep and vision. It is a secret they share without speaking, a knowledge that passes between mothers who have loved and lost, who have learned that some truths can only be understood in the landscape of dreams. The fire burns bright, casting warm light on the cave walls. Somewhere in the distance, a baby cries and is quickly comforted. The tribe begins another day of survival, of hope tempered by the constant awareness of mortality. But something has shifted in the quality of that hope. It is no longer desperate or fragile. It has been touched by the certainty that love endures, that connection transcends the boundaries of flesh, that those we have lost are not truly gone, but transformed into something that our limited understanding can glimpse only in dreams and visions. The mother looks toward the cave opening, where the dawn sky holds the last fading stars. Each point of light seems to pulse with its own small heartbeat, and she smiles, knowing that somewhere among them, her daughter dances in fields of light, waiting patiently for the day when they will walk together again in the grassland, where earth meets sky, and love needs no words to make itself known. The storm comes from the north like a living thing, hungry and patient, and vast beyond human comprehension. For 3 days, the tribe has watched the sky darken, seen the clouds gather in formations that speak of violence to come. The wind has shifted, carrying on its breath the sharp scent of snow and the deeper cold that comes from places where no sun has shone for months. The animals know what approaches. The birds have fled south in great ragged lines. The deer have disappeared into hidden valleys. Even the wolves have gone quiet, seeking shelter in caves and hollows carved by ancient waters. The tribe huddles in their winter camp, a cluster of hide shelters, arranged in a circle around the great fire that has burned without ceasing for 6 moons. The fire is their anchor, their defense against the darkness and cold that can kill as surely as any predator. They have fed it constantly, taking turns through each night to add fuel, to coax flame from ember, to ensure that the sacred heat never dies. But tonight, the storm tests even their most careful preparations. The wind arrives first, howling across the grasslands, with a voice like 10,000 spirits crying in unison. It strikes their camp with force enough to flatten the smaller shelters, sending hides and poles tumbling into the darkness. The fire, which has seemed so permanent, so reliable, suddenly flickers and bends under the assault. Sparks rise in spirals, torn away by the wind before they can settle back into the safety of flame. The tribe emerges from their damaged shelters to fight for their survival. Men and women work together, trying to shield the fire with their own bodies, using hides stretched between poles to create barriers against the relentless wind. Children are gathered into the largest shelter, press together for warmth, while the adults battle the elements that seem determined to extinguish the light that keeps them alive. Then the snow begins. It does not fall gently, like the soft snow of early winter, that dusts the ground with crystalline beauty. This snow comes horizontally, driven by winds that turn each flake into a tiny blade of ice. It stings the face, penetrates every gap in clothing, accumulates so quickly that the tribe must constantly brush it away from the fire or risk having their flames smothered beneath a white blanket of cold death. The temperature plummets with terrifying speed. Breath becomes visible, then painful, then a labor that costs precious energy with each exhalation. Fingers grow numb, despite thick mittens made from rabbit fur. Feet lose feeling inside boots, lined with the softest hide the tribe could gather. The cold is not merely uncomfortable. It is a predator, stalking each person individually, looking for weaknesses, waiting for the moment when exhaustion, or injury, or simple bad luck will allow it to claim another victim. Hours pass. The storm shows no sign of weakening. If anything, it seems to grow stronger, as if feeding on the tribe's struggle, drawing power from their desperation. The adults take turns standing guard over the fire, but the effort required to keep it alive is enormous. Each person can manage only brief periods before the cold drives them back to seek shelter and warmth, forcing another to take their place in the battle against wind and snow. The baby is the first to show distress. She is the newest member of the tribe, born just 2 moons ago in the season when the leaves began their golden dance toward earth. Her mother has kept her wrapped against her chest, skin to skin beneath layers of fur and hide, sharing her own body heat in the ancient way that has kept infants alive through countless harsh winters. But even this primal protection has limits, and the terrible cold of the storm reaches deeper than human warmth can penetrate. The baby's cries grow weaker as the night progresses. Her small limbs, which should be active and strong, become still and pale. Her breathing, which should be quick and steady, becomes shallow and irregular. Her mother holds her closer, breathes on the tiny fingers and toes, rubs the small back with hands that shake from cold and fear. But she can feel the life force ebbing from the child like heat bleeding away into the merciless night. Other families face similar terrors. An old man who has survived 60 winters begins to cough blood, his aged lungs unable to process the brutal air. A pregnant woman goes into early labor, her body responding to the stress of cold and fear by trying to expel the child, who is not yet ready for the world. Twin boys who have always been the strongest runners in the tribe huddle together, their lips blue, their eyes glazed with the particular exhaustion that comes when the body begins to shut down non-essential functions to preserve core warmth. And then, in the darkest hour of the storm, disaster strikes. A particularly violent gust of wind, stronger than any that has come before, sweeps across the camp with the force of an avalanche. It tears through their carefully constructed barriers, scatters the wood they have gathered for fuel, and worst of all, throws snow and ice directly onto the central fire. The flames hiss and sputter, fighting to survive beneath the assault of frozen water, but they are overwhelmed. The fire dies. For the first time in 6 months, darkness claims their camp completely. The absence of light is shocking, but the absence of heat is terrifying. Without the fire's warmth, the temperature around them drops immediately. The cold becomes a living presence, pressing against them from all sides, seeping through their clothes, their skin, their very bones. Panic threatens to take hold, but the grandmother's voice cuts through the wind and fear. She calls out instructions, directing the adults to gather the scattered wood, to clear the snow from the fire pit, to protect the few remaining embers that might still hold a spark of life. In the complete darkness, they work by touch alone, their hands clumsy with cold, their movements slowed by the desperate knowledge that failure means death for all of them. The baby stops crying. In the midst of the struggle to rekindle their salvation, the sudden silence draws the mother's attention to the small form against her chest. She cannot see in the darkness, but her hands know what they find: a body grown too still, breath that no longer warms the air between them, a heart that has beaten its last rhythm against her own. The grief that floods through her is as fierce as the storm itself, but she cannot give in to it now. Around her, the tribe continues their desperate work. and she knows that her own survival, the survival of everyone she loves, depends on their ability to bring light back to this terrible darkness. She wraps her daughter's body carefully, tenderly, and joins the others in their battle against the night. It takes 2 hours to coax flame from the few embers that survived the storm's assault. 2 hours of careful breathing on glowing coals, of feeding them tiny scraps of birch bark and dry grass, of protecting the fragile spark with cupped hands, while the wind tries to steal even this last hope. When the first small flame finally dances to life, the tribe releases a collective sigh that mingles relief with exhaustion and grief. The fire grows slowly, fed with infinite care, until it becomes strong enough to push back against the cold and darkness. As warmth returns to the camp, the full cost of the storm becomes clear. The baby is gone, as is the old man who coughed blood. The pregnant woman has miscarried, losing both her own life and the child she carried. 3 others show signs of frostbite that will claim fingers, toes, perhaps entire limbs, before the winter ends. But the fire burns. Against all odds, against the fury of the storm, against the overwhelming power of a world that seems determined to erase human presence from its surface, the fire burns. It is smaller than before, more fragile, but it lives. And where fire lives, hope can survive. The storm continues for 2 more days, but the tribe endures. They have learned something fundamental about the nature of existence, that life hangs by threads so thin they are nearly invisible, that survival is never guaranteed, that the forces arrayed against human persistence are vast and patient and utterly indifferent to human suffering. Yet, they also learn that something in the human spirit refuses to surrender. Even when the fire dies, they work to rekindle it. Even when loved ones are lost, they continue to care for the living. Even when the storm seems endless, they maintain faith that dawn will come, that spring will return, that life will find a way to persist, despite every reason to give up. When the winds finally calm and the snow stops falling, the tribe emerges into a world transformed. The landscape is white and clean and eerily silent, as if the storm has swept away not just their possessions but the very sounds of life itself. They bury their dead in the frozen earth, marking the graves with stones arranged in patterns that speak of love transcending loss. The baby who died in the storm becomes part of the tribe's memory, another small soul added to the vast collection of stories they carry. Her mother will dream of her dancing with the other children in fields of starlight. Her grandmother will speak her name when the wind blows cold, acknowledging the brief life that mattered despite its shortness. The fire burns on, rebuilt, and tended with even greater care than before. It has become more than warmth, more than light. It is a symbol of the human refusal to accept defeat, a beacon that proclaims to an indifferent universe that love persists, that hope endures, that some lights cannot be extinguished no matter how dark the night becomes. Tens of thousands of years later, in a time when the grasslands have become fields of wheat, when the caves have been forgotten beneath cities of stone and steel, the archaeologist kneels in the dirt and brushes away the centuries with infinite care. Her tools are small and precise soft brushes that whisper against ancient earth, tiny picks that can expose bone without scratching it, measuring devices that record the exact position of each discovery. She works slowly, patiently, knowing that each stroke of the brush might reveal something that has waited millennia to tell its story. The sun beats down on her back as she labors, but she barely notices the heat. Her attention is focused entirely on the small skeleton that has begun to emerge from the soil. It is the skeleton of a child. Not unusual in itself, infant mortality in prehistoric times was devastating, and archaeologists have found countless graves of babies who lived only days or weeks before succumbing to the harsh realities of their world. But this burial is different. This child was not simply placed in the earth and forgotten. Someone loved this baby enough to prepare for their journey to whatever comes after life. The archaeologist's brush reveals the curve of tiny ribs, no bigger than bird bones. Below them, the delicate architecture of a spine that never had the chance to support a walking, running, laughing child. The skull, when she finally exposes it completely, is almost perfectly preserved, a miracle of chemistry and chance that has kept these fragile remains intact through the long centuries. But it is not the bones themselves that make her breath catch in her throat. It is what surrounds them. Scattered around the small skeleton are treasures that speak of a love so profound it defies the passage of time. Shells that came from seas hundreds of miles away, carried by traders or gathered during long migrations, each one chosen for its beauty, its rarity, its fitness to accompany a soul on its final journey. Pieces of ochre red earth that has been shaped and carved into tiny figurines, abstract symbols, patterns that hint at beliefs and hopes too complex for modern minds to fully comprehend. There are beads made from animal teeth, polished smooth by patient hands, strung on sinew that has long since decayed, but left behind telltale stains in the soil. Tiny tools, crafted with the same care given to full-sized implements, miniature spear points, impossibly small scrapers, a needle so thin it could thread spider silk. These were not toys for a living child but grave goods for a spirit, provisions for a journey to realms that exist beyond the reach of earthly concerns. The archaeologist photographs each item in place before carefully removing it for study. Her movements are reverent, respectful of the grief that placed these objects here so long ago. She knows that she is the first person to see this burial since the day it was sealed with earth and stones, since the day someone's heart broke with such force that they needed to send their child away with every beautiful thing they could gather. As she works, she thinks about the hands that arranged these treasures. They were probably a mother's hands. Women in prehistoric societies typically prepared the dead for burial, especially children. But they might have been a father's hands, or a grandmother's, or the hands of an entire community that recognized the universal tragedy of a life cut short before it could truly begin. Those hands would have been rough from daily survival, scarred by stone tools and weather, marked by the constant work required to stay alive in a world without modern conveniences. But they moved with infinite gentleness as they placed each shell, positioned each bead, arranged each piece of ochre in patterns that had meaning now lost to time. They were hands that understood the weight of loss, the need to make meaning from tragedy, the human compulsion to transform grief into something beautiful. The burial tells a story that transcends the specific details of time and place. It speaks to something universal in human nature, the refusal to accept that death is merely absence, the insistence that love continues beyond the moment when breath stops. Every culture that has ever existed has developed rituals around death, ways of honoring the departed, methods of maintaining connection with those who have moved beyond the reach of physical touch. This child, whose name is lost forever, whose face will never be known, whose voice was stilled before it could speak its first word, was nevertheless deemed worthy of a treasure house. Someone believed deeply enough in the continuation of consciousness after death to send this baby away with provisions for the journey. The shells might have served as currency in the spirit world. The ochre might have provided protection or identification. The miniature tools might have allowed the child's soul to participate in the hunts and gatherings of the ancestors. Or perhaps the grave goods had no practical purpose at all. Perhaps they were simply expressions of love, too vast to be contained by death. Gifts that said, "You mattered," to a universe that seemed indifferent to individual suffering. Perhaps they were the prehistoric equivalent of flowers placed on modern graves, gestures that comfort the living more than they benefit the dead, but that serve an essential function in helping human hearts process the incomprehensible fact of mortality. The archaeologist has seen hundreds of burials in her career, but infant graves always affect her differently. There is something particularly poignant about the careful burial of a child who had barely begun to experience life. These babies knew only the warmth of their mother's arms, the taste of milk, the comfort of being held close to a beating heart. They had no chance to run through grass or splash in streams, to learn the names of stars or the seasons of growing things, to discover their own personalities or forge their own paths through the world. Yet their graves suggest that their brief lives were not considered meaningless. The very fact that they were buried with such care, surrounded by precious objects, indicates that their communities understood something profound about the nature of existence. They recognized that duration is not the only measure of significance, that a life can matter even if it lasts only hours or days, that love is not diminished by the brevity of its object. She finds more evidence of this belief as she continues her excavation. Near the child's head is a pendant made from a perfectly round pebble, pierced through the center and worn smooth by handling. Someone carried this stone for years before placing it here, perhaps keeping it warm against their skin, touching it when they thought of the child they lost. It is a talisman of memory, a physical anchor for grief that needed expression in the material world. Beside the pendant is something even more remarkable, a small piece of wood that has somehow survived the millennia, preserved by the particular chemistry of this soil. When she examines it closely, she can see that it has been carved, shaped by human hands into the rough approximation of a human figure. It is crude by modern artistic standards, but it speaks of the same impulse that drives parents today to save their children's first drawings, to treasure handprints made in clay, to keep locks of hair long after the head that grew it has turned to dust. The wooden figure is a portrait of love, an attempt to capture the essence of a child in a form that might survive beyond the decay of flesh. It suggests that someone sat by firelight during the long nights of mourning, working the wood with stone tools, trying to create something that would keep their baby's memory alive in the world of the living. The figure would have been held, carried, perhaps passed down through generations, as a reminder that this child existed, mattered, was loved, beyond the capacity of words to express. As the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the excavation site, the archaeologist carefully packages the remains and artifacts for transport to the laboratory. There they will be studied, dated, analyzed for clues about diet, health, genetic relationships, and cultural practices. Scientists will extract DNA, measure isotope ratios, create three-dimensional models of the skull. The bones will yield their secrets to modern technology, adding to humanity's understanding of its prehistoric past. But no amount of scientific analysis can capture the most important truth that this burial reveals: that human beings have always been creatures capable of profound love, of devastating grief, of the need to find meaning in loss. The shells and ochre and tiny tools are evidence of an emotional complexity that rivals anything found in modern humans. They prove that the capacity for love, the impulse to honor the dead, the refusal to accept that death is the end of relationship, are not recent developments in human evolution, but ancient characteristics that have defined our species since the earliest times. Somewhere beneath the earth of every continent, similar burials wait to be discovered. Children wrapped in love, made tangible, surrounded by the best gifts their families could provide. Evidence of hearts that broke and mended and learned to carry on despite losses that seemed unbearable. Each grave is a time capsule of emotion, a message from the past that speaks directly to the modern heart, without need for translation. The archaeologist packs the last of the artifacts as darkness falls. Tomorrow she will return to continue the excavation, to search for more evidence of the community that lived and loved and lost on this spot so many thousands of years ago. But tonight, as she drives away from the site, she carries with her the certainty that the fundamental experiences of human existence, love, loss, hope, grief, the desperate desire to make meaning from suffering have not changed despite all the centuries that separate her from the mourning parents who placed those shells and beads around their child's body. In the end, the bones beneath the earth tell a story that transcends time, a story of love that refuses to be defeated by death, of communities that recognize the value of every life, no matter how brief, of human beings who have always found ways to transform their deepest pain into something beautiful and enduring. The child who died in that prehistoric camp lives on in the careful arrangement of grave goods, in the love that placed them there, in the archaeologist's wonder at discovering them, and in the recognition that some things about being human never change. In the season when the leaves turn gold and the great herds begin their southern journey, the grandmother sits alone beside the stream and speaks to the wind. Her words are not quite language, not yet the complex grammar that will someday carry philosophy and poetry across generations. They are something more fundamental, older, closer to the heartbeat and the rhythm of breathing. They rise from a place deeper than thought, born from the ancient human need, to address the vast mystery that surrounds every moment of existence. She speaks to her daughter, not the grown woman who died in the difficult birth 3 winters ago, but the child that daughter once was the girl who laughed as she splashed in this same stream, who brought her grandmother flowers picked from the grassland, who fell asleep each night curled against the old woman's side like a puppy seeking warmth. That child lives still in the grandmother's memory, preserved in perfect detail by the alchemy of love, and it is to her that the old woman directs her words. The water runs clear today, she whispers to the moving air. The fish are fat and the berries ripen early. Your son grows strong. He has your eyes, your way of watching birds, as if they carry messages from distant places. He asks for you when the lightning comes. I tell him you have become the thunder, that you speak to him from the storm clouds. The wind shifts, rustling the leaves of the willow that droops its branches into the stream. The grandmother nods as if she has received an answer, as if the sound of moving air carries actual words instead of simply the physics of pressure and temperature. To her, this is conversation. To her, the boundary between the living and the dead is as permeable as the surface of water, allowing communication to flow both ways across the divide. This is how prayer begins, not with temples or scriptures or complex theology, but with the simple refusal to accept that death is the end of relationship. The grandmother has no concept of gods, as later humans will understand them. She does not imagine powerful beings sitting in judgment, distributing rewards and punishments according to moral codes. Instead, she experiences the world as alive, conscious, populated by spirits that were once flesh and blood, but have now become something more elemental. Her daughter lives in the wind that brings the rain. Her own mother, dead these 20 years, whispers through the grass when it bends before the storm. Her first son, taken by fever, before his second summer, runs with the deer that drink from the stream at dawn. They are not gone, they have simply changed form. The way water becomes mist, the way leaves become soil, the way fire becomes light, and heat, and the memory of warmth. The grandmother reaches into the leather pouch that hangs at her waist and draws out a small piece of amber. Inside the golden resin, trapped for millions of years, is the perfect form of a tiny flower. She found this treasure years ago while digging roots near the old cliff, and she has carried it ever since as a reminder that beauty can be preserved, that some things survive unchanged across vast spans of time. She holds the amber up to catch the sunlight, watching the way the light transforms the ancient flower into something that seems to glow with its own inner fire. This is her offering, her sacrifice, her attempt to create a bridge between the world of matter and the world of spirit. She places it carefully on a flat stone beside the stream, where the water will wash over it, but not carry it away. For your grandson, she says to the wind, to the watching spirits, to the consciousness she feels flowing through everything around her, that he might know beauty, that he might understand that some things last beyond the body that holds them. Other members of the tribe have begun to develop their own rituals, their own ways of maintaining connection with the dead. The young mother who lost her baby in the storm has started leaving milk beside the fire each morning, pouring a few precious drops onto the earth before she feeds her surviving children. She says nothing about this practice, but everyone understands its meaning. She is feeding the child who no longer has a mouth to suckle, nourishing the spirit that no longer needs nourishment. The hunter who lost his father to the great cat draws pictures on cave walls, not the careful hunting scenes that will teach future generations, but abstract patterns that seem to move in the flickering firelight. Lines that spiral like wind, dots that shine like stars, shapes that suggest the flight of souls from one realm to another. He works on these images in the quiet hours, when the tribe sleeps, using charcoal and ochre to create maps of territories that exist beyond the reach of human feet. The children watch these adult behaviors and begin to develop their own understanding of the invisible world. They leave toys made of grass and stones in special places, offerings to the spirits of children who died before they could play. They sing wordless songs that they claim came to them in dreams, melodies that supposedly carry messages from the ancestors. They create elaborate games involving death and rebirth, acting out their growing comprehension that existence continues in forms they cannot quite grasp, but somehow sense. Slowly, without conscious planning or organized effort, the tribe develops a cosmology. They begin to understand the world as layered, the immediate realm of flesh and fire and food, and beneath it, a deeper reality where the dead continue their existence in new forms. They learn to read signs in natural phenomena, interpreting the flight of birds as messages from departed loved ones, seeing the faces of ancestors in cloud formations, hearing familiar voices in the sound of wind through rock formations. This emerging spirituality is not separate from daily survival. It is woven into every aspect of their existence. Before each hunt, the men pour a few drops of precious water onto the earth, asking the spirits of successful hunters to guide their spears. Before gathering roots, the women whisper thanks to the plants they will harvest, acknowledging the sacrifice of life that sustains life. Before sleep, parents teach their children to listen for the voices of grandparents in the crackling of the fire, to feel the protection of ancestors in the warmth of furs and hides. The grandmother rises from her place beside the stream, leaving the amber offering on its stone altar. As she walks back toward the camp, she continues her conversation with the invisible presences that surround her. She asks her daughter to watch over the pregnant woman whose time grows near. She requests her mother's wisdom in the gathering of winter stores. She seeks her son's blessing on the young boys who will soon undergo their first hunt. These are not desperate pleas to distant deities, but intimate conversations with family members who happen to exist in a different state of being. The grandmother speaks to them as she spoke when they lived in flesh, with love, with casual affection, with the easy familiarity of people who have shared joy and sorrow, laughter and tears, the daily business of staying alive in a difficult world. As she approaches the camp, she hears other voices, raised in their own forms of prayer. The hunter chants softly as he shapes new spear points, asking the stone to reveal its strongest form. The mother of twins hums a lullaby that she learned from her own mother, a song that supposedly keeps night terrors at bay. The eldest man of the tribe tells stories to the fire, feeding it not just wood but words, maintaining the ancient bargain that keeps flame alive in exchange for the gift of warmth and light. This is how religion begins, not with revelation from above, but with recognition that consciousness pervades everything, that love transcends the boundaries of physical existence, that the dead continue to participate in the lives of the living, through memory, dream, ritual, and the endless human need to maintain connection across the apparent finality of death. The grandmother settles beside the fire and adds her own voice to the quiet chorus of prayer that rises from the camp each evening. She speaks of gratitude for the day's safety, of hope for tomorrow's abundance, of love that extends backward to the ancestors and forward to the generations yet unborn. Her words are simple, unadorned by theological complexity, but they carry the full weight of human longing for meaning, for continuity, for the assurance that existence matters beyond the brief span of individual life. Above her, the first stars appear in the darkening sky. Each point of light seems to pulse with familiar warmth, and she nods in recognition. There is her daughter, dancing among the eternal fires. There is her mother, weaving new constellations from the threads of starlight. There is her first son, racing across the vast meadows of heaven with all the children who died too young to know the weight of earthly sorrows. They are not lost. They have simply gone ahead to prepare the way, to light the path that all the living will eventually follow. In speaking to them, in offering gifts to their spirits, in maintaining the bonds of love that death cannot break, the grandmother participates in the first and most fundamental religious act, the refusal to accept that consciousness ends. When the body fails, the insistence that love creates continuity beyond the apparent boundaries of individual existence. The fire burns bright, casting dancing shadows on the faces gathered around it. In those shadows, the grandmother sees the faces of all who have gone before, all who will come after, all who share in the endless conversation between the living and the dead that gives meaning to the brief, bright spark of human existence. Prayer has been invented not through divine command, but through the simple recognition that some relationships transcend the grave, that some love proves stronger than death, that some conversations continue long after one voice has fallen silent. The wind carries her words away into the darkness, but she knows they are heard. Somewhere in the spaces between starlight and shadow, between memory and hope, between the world that is and the world that might be, her daughter listens and responds with the eternal language of love that needs no words to make itself understood. The first sign comes with the wind. For months, the air has moved across the grasslands, with the sharp bite of winter in its teeth, carrying snow and the promise of more snow, speaking only of endurance and survival, and the long patience required to outlast the season of death. But on this morning, something has changed in the way the wind touches the earth. It moves more gently, carries different scents, whispers of distant places where ice has begun to crack, and birds have started their ancient journey home. The grandmother feels the shift before anyone else in the tribe. She has lived through more winters than most, has learned to read the subtle signs that mark the turning of seasons. Standing outside the winter shelter, as dawn breaks grey and soft over the snow-covered landscape, she tilts her face toward the sky and breathes deeply, tasting possibilities in the air. Spring comes. She announces to the camp, her voice carrying the quiet authority of one who has witnessed this miracle dozens of times, but still finds wonder in its return. The words spread from shelter to shelter, bringing faces to doorways, drawing the tribe out into the pale morning light, to confirm what their hearts hardly dare believe. The snow still lies deep on the ground, unmarked except for the tracks of rabbits and the occasional deer brave enough to venture from the protection of the distant tree line. The world appears as locked in winter's grip, as it has for the past 4 months. But those who know how to look can see the signs of change beginning to emerge, like the first tentative notes of a song that will soon swell into symphony. The sky itself tells the story. For weeks, it has been a uniform grey dome, heavy with the weight of storms waiting to be born. But now it shows patches of deeper blue, spaces where sunlight can penetrate without being immediately swallowed by clouds. The sun, when it appears between the shifting patterns of vapor and ice, crystals, sits higher in the sky than it has since autumn, promising longer days, more warmth, the gradual melting that will free the earth from winter's hold. A child, one of the few who survived the harsh season, points toward the horizon and calls out in excitement. There, barely visible against the sky, a wedge of birds moves northward. They are still too distant to identify, but their mere presence speaks of transformation, of the great wheel of seasons beginning its turn toward renewal. Soon those birds will be joined by others, and others still, until the sky fills with wings, and the air resonates with the ancient songs of migration and return. The mother who lost her baby during the terrible storm emerges from her shelter carrying her surviving daughter, born just as winter was loosening its grip. The infant is healthy, thriving despite the harsh conditions, her bright eyes reflecting the growing light of the longer days. She represents something more than individual survival. She embodies the tribe's refusal to surrender to despair, their commitment to continuing life, despite the losses that winter has brought. She will know warmth. The mother whispers to her baby, holding the small form up toward the lightening sky. She will feel grass beneath her feet, see flowers bloom, hear the songs of birds returning home. She will know that winter ends, that spring always comes, that life finds its way back to joy, despite the darkness that sometimes tries to claim it. Around the camp, other members of the tribe begin to emerge from the deep hibernation that has sustained them through the coldest months. They move slowly at first, like creatures awakening from profound sleep. But gradually, their movements become more animated as they sense the change in the air, the shift in the light, the promise written in the wind's new voice. The men begin to discuss plans for the spring hunt. The great herds will be moving north soon, following the same, invisible, paths that have guided their migrations for thousands of years. There will be meat again, fat, to sustain them through another year, hides to replace what winter's harshness has worn thin. The women talk of the plants they will gather once the snow melts, tender shoots that will provide the first fresh food after months of dried stores, roots that will have been sweetened by the winter's cold, berries that will ripen in the warming days ahead. But it is not just the practical aspects of survival that occupy their thoughts. The approaching spring represents something deeper, more fundamental to human understanding than mere physical sustenance. It embodies the essential truth that destruction is always followed by renewal, that death gives way to rebirth, that the darkest nights are followed by the brightest dawns. The grandmother walks slowly through the camp, noting the signs of winter's passage. Here, a shelter that collapsed under the weight of snow and was never rebuilt, marking the place where an old man breathed his last. There, a fire pit that has remained cold since the night when fuel ran short and difficult choices had to be made about where to concentrate the tribe's dwindling resources. Everywhere, the evidence of loss, of struggle, of the prices paid for survival, in a world that offers no guarantees. Yet as she walks, she also sees signs of continuity, of hope, of the stubborn human refusal to be defeated by circumstances beyond their control. Children play in the snow, their laughter bright as birdsong, their energy proof that life persists despite its fragility. Adults work together to repair damage from the winter storms, their cooperation evidence that community survives even when individuals do not. Pregnant women rest in sunny spots, their growing bellies promising new life to replace what has been lost. The wind shifts again, and this time it carries something unmistakable, the scent of water running free. Somewhere, perhaps miles away, the ice has begun to break up on the rivers. Streams that have been silent for months are beginning to sing again as winter's grip loosens and the imprisoned waters find their voice. The sound of running water will draw game animals from their winter hiding places, will provide new sources of fish and fresh drinking water, will mark the paths that the tribe will follow as they begin their own migration towards summer abundance. As the day progresses, more signs appear. A patch of bare earth where the snow has melted completely, revealing the dark soil beneath. A bird call from the nearby trees, not the harsh cry of the winter scavengers who have shared their struggle, but the liquid song of a creature returning from warmer places. A shift in the quality of light that speaks of atmosphere changing, of the great patterns of wind and weather realigning themselves for the season of growth. The grandmother finds herself thinking of those who did not live to see this day. The baby who died in the storm, whose brief life ended before she could witness a single change of seasons. The old ones who gave up their rations so that younger mouths could be fed, who chose to walk into the winter darkness rather than consume resources that others needed more desperately. The pregnant woman whose body could not sustain 2 lives through the harshest months, who traded her future for the hope that her existing children might survive. They are all part of this moment, she realizes. Their sacrifices, their love, their willingness to give their own lives for the continuation of the tribe, all of it contributes to the miracle of renewal that now unfolds around her. Winter has not been meaningless suffering, but part of the great cycle that makes spring possible, that gives weight and significance to survival, that transforms mere existence into something approaching triumph. As evening approaches, the tribe gathers around the central fire to mark the turning of the season. The turning of the season. They have no formal calendar, no written records of dates and times, but they understand instinctively that this day marks a boundary, a passage from one phase of existence to another. The grandmother speaks the words that acknowledge their losses while celebrating their persistence, that honor the dead while welcoming the living into the promise of warmer days ahead. We have walked through the valley of winter, she says, her voice carrying across the camp like smoke from the sacred fire. We have felt the breath of death on our necks, tasted the bitterness of loss on our tongues, carried the weight of sorrow in our bones, but we have not been conquered. We have not surrendered. We have kept the fire burning, kept the children safe, kept the hope alive that spring would come again. She raises her arms toward the sky, where the first stars are beginning to appear in the gathering dusk. But now those stars seem different. Not the cold, distant lights that have watched over their winter struggles, but warm beacons welcoming them back to the world of the living. The sky returns to us, she continues, her words becoming almost a chant, a prayer of gratitude and hope. The earth awakens beneath our feet. The waters run free. The birds come home. The grass prepares to grow green and tall. We have survived the testing. We have proven ourselves worthy of another year, another season, another chance to love and laugh and raise our children in the warmth of the returning sun. Around the fire, faces glow with something more than reflected firelight. They shine with the recognition that they have endured, that they have passed through the crucible of winter and emerged transformed but not destroyed. They are fewer than they were when the cold first came, marked by losses that will never fully heal. But they are still a tribe, still a family, still a community bound together by shared struggle and mutual care. The baby, born at winter's end, sleeps peacefully in her mother's arms, unaware that she is witnessing one of humanity's oldest rituals, the celebration of survival, the acknowledgement that life persists despite every reason to despair, the recognition that hope is not naive optimism, but the hardest-won wisdom of all. As the fire burns lower, and the tribe prepares for sleep, the grandmother looks once more toward the sky. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new struggles, new tests of their ability to adapt and survive. But tonight, in the space between winter's ending and spring's beginning, there is room for gratitude, for joy, for the simple recognition that they have been given another chance to experience the miracle of existence. The wind carries her whispered prayer toward the stars, where the spirits of the lost dance in eternal celebration. They have not died in vain, she knows. Their sacrifices have purchased this moment, this return of hope, this promise that life finds a way to continue, despite the darkness that sometimes threatens to overwhelm it. The sky has returned, and with it, the possibility of joy. In the quiet spaces between one breath and the next, where thoughts drift like mist across the landscape of memory, the ancient understanding takes shape. Death is not an ending, but a doorway, not a wall, but a passage into something vast and patient and forever. Long before temples rose toward the sky, before scrolls carried the weight of sacred words, before prophets spoke of kingdoms beyond the veil, human hearts knew this truth. They felt it in the way morning light returned after the longest night, in the way seeds buried in winter earth pushed through spring soil toward warmth, in the way love persisted even when the beloved could no longer return its touch. The first afterlives were not grand architectures of reward and punishment, but intimate spaces carved from longing and hope. They were as close as the next valley, as distant as the stars that wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. They were places where children who had lived only days could run on legs that never tired, where mothers who died in birth could hold their babies without pain, where the old could remember their youth, and the young could know the wisdom of ages. In the caves where firelight painted dancing shadows on stone walls, the dead were not gone, but transformed. They lived in the flicker of flame, in the echo of voices, in the warm breath that rose from sleeping forms curled close together against the cold. When wind moved through the cavern passages, it carried with it the whispers of ancestors, their voices blending into a chorus that spoke of patience, of watching, of love that outlasted the flesh that once contained it. The grandmother, who had lost 7 children, knew this truth in her bones. She would sit in the mouth of the cave at twilight, watching the first stars emerge from the deepening blue, and speak to them as if they were the eyes of her babies looking down. Each point of light held a story, a brief life that had mattered despite its brevity. In her understanding, the sky itself was a vast nursery where the souls of children played among the eternal fires, safe at last, from hunger and cold and the thousand small dangers that stalked life on earth. Other tribes, scattered across the grasslands like seeds on the wind, developed their own geographies of the dead. Some believed their ancestors lived beneath the earth, in vast caverns lit by the glow of precious stones, where rivers ran clear and sweet, and game was always plentiful. Others saw them in the mountains, dwelling in peaks so high that earthbound eyes could never reach them, breathing air so pure it sustained souls without the need for food or water. The hunting peoples traced their dead in the migration patterns of the great herds. When the bison thundered across the plains in numbers beyond counting, the hunters saw among them the spirits of their fallen brothers, running forever with the animals they had pursued in life, joining the eternal hunt that knew no seasons, no scarcity, no failure. The sound of hooves on earth became a drumbeat that connected the living to the dead, a rhythm that pulsed through the ground and into the hearts of those who listened with more than their ears. By the shores of ancient lakes, where reeds whispered secrets to the water and fish moved like silver thoughts beneath the surface, the fishers knew their dead lived in the depths, not drowned but transformed, become part of the flowing currents that carried life from source to sea and back again. When mist rose from the water at dawn, they saw the breath of ancestors, the exhalation of souls who had learned to breathe water instead of air, who swam in realms where depth had no bottom and darkness held no fear. The mothers who gathered roots and berries, who knew which plants healed and which brought harm, understood that their lost children had become the flowers. Every bloom that opened to the sun carried within it the essence of a brief life, the spirit of a baby who had known only love before returning to the earth that birthed all growing things. In spring, when the meadows burst into color, they walked among gardens tended by the hands of the dead, beauty cultivated by souls who had learned new ways to nurture and sustain. These early heavens required no priests, no complex rituals, no elaborate moral codes. They were born from the simple recognition that love creates its own continuity, that consciousness once awakened cannot simply cease, that the bonds between parent and child are stronger than the forces that seem to break them. They were democratic paradises where every soul mattered equally, where the child who lived one day held the same value as the elder who survived 60 winters. In these imagined realms, there was no suffering because suffering belonged to the world of flesh. There was no hunger because spirits fed on light itself. There was no cold because souls carried within and the warmth of every heart that had ever loved them. There was no fear because death, having been conquered once, held no more power over those who had passed through its gates. The storytellers who carried these visions from tribe to tribe, who shared the comfort of belief across the vast distances that separated human communities, spoke of reunion as the central promise of the afterlife. Mothers would hold their children again. Children would run to parents who had mourned them. Lovers separated by tragedy would find each other in the endless meadows where no goodbye was ever final. But these reunions were not simply the restoration of earthly relationships. They were transformations, elevations, the perfection of love, freed from the limitations of mortal existence. The child who had been stillborn would meet the mother she had never known in life, and they would recognize each other instantly, completely, with a knowledge that transcended physical memory. The father who had died before his son's birth would greet the boy with all the love he had never been able to express, and the son would understand, in that moment of meeting, every sacrifice that had been made for his sake. Time moved differently in these realms of spirit. A day might last a lifetime might pass in the space between heartbeats. Souls could experience all the moments they had missed in life, the conversations never held, the embraces never shared, the words of love never spoken. They could watch over the living without the pain of separation, could guide and protect without the frustration of being unable to intervene directly in the struggles of the flesh. As night settled over the grasslands and the fires burned low in camps scattered across the vast expanse of earth, the believers found comfort in their visions of eternity. They lay down to sleep, knowing that their dead were not lost but present, not absent but transformed, not gone but waiting, in realms where patience was infinite and love was the only law that governed existence. The long sleep that claimed all living things was not an end but a beginning, not a loss but a homecoming, not a separation but the ultimate reunion. In dreams, the living could sometimes visit these places, could walk for a brief time in the company of those they had lost, could receive the comfort and guidance that death seemed to have stolen from them. And in the morning, when they woke to face another day of struggle and survival, they carried with them the certainty that nothing truly important was ever lost, that love created its own eternity, that somewhere beyond the reach of earthly sorrow, their children played in gardens of light, waiting with the patience of souls who knew that all journeys eventually lead home. The stars continued their wheeling dance overhead, each one a beacon lit by love, a promise written in fire across the vast darkness that surrounds all life. In their light, the ancient understanding lived on, passed from heart to heart, across the generations, a gift of hope that transformed grief into peace, loss into certainty, death into the longest and most patient embrace of all. In the deeper chambers of the cave, where sunlight never reaches and the air holds the cool breath of the mountain's heart, the sound begins. Tap, tap, tap. Stone against stone in rhythm, ancient as heartbeat, deliberate as breathing, patient as the slow erosion that carved these passages from solid rock. The sound echoes off the walls, multiplies and layers upon itself, becomes a drumbeat that seems to emerge from the earth itself, a percussion that connects the world above to the hidden spaces where memory takes physical form. The woman holds the hammerstone carefully, her fingers wrapped around the smooth basalt that has shaped itself to her grip through countless hours of use. Before her, the cave wall waits a canvas of limestone that has stood unchanged for millennia, unmarked by human touch, until this moment when grief seeks expression in the only medium that might outlast the brief span of mortal sorrow. She is creating a lullaby in stone, not the soft melodies that mothers hum to sleeping babies, but something deeper, more permanent, a song that will continue long after her voice has fallen silent. Each strike of the hammer creates a small depression in the rock, a mark that joins with others to form patterns, shapes, meanings that speak directly to the heart, without need for words or explanation. Around her, the work of other mourners covers the walls like a constellation of grief made visible. Handprints pressed in ochre and clay, the most common and most powerful of all human marks, the signature of the living, pressed into permanence, as testimony that they existed, that they mattered, that they touched this world with intention and love. Some prints are large, belonging to adults who sought to leave evidence of their passage. Others are heartbreakingly small, the tiny hands of children, guided by parents who knew that these impressions might be the only proof their babies had ever lived. The rhythmic hammering continues, creating its own music in the cathedral space of stone. This is humanity's first orchestra, the percussion of memory-making, the symphony of souls who refuse to let love be forgotten. The sounds layer and interweave, creating harmonies that seem to emerge from the cave itself, as if the mountain was singing back to those who mark its walls with their stories. She works by the light of a torch wedged into a crack in the rock, the flame-casting, dancing shadows that make her emerging artwork seem to move, to breathe, to live. What she creates is not realistic in the way that cave paintings of animals are realistic. This is something more abstract, more symbolic, more concerned with capturing essence than appearance. Lines that spiral like the path of souls, dots that shine like stars, shapes that suggest wings, water, the flight of spirits from one realm to another. This is her daughter's funeral song, carved into stone that will outlast 1,000 generations. The technique is laborious, requiring patience beyond ordinary understanding. Each mark must be struck with just the right force, too gentle, and the stone remains unmarked, too forceful, and the delicate work shatters. She has learned this craft through bitter necessity, the way all mothers learn the skills required by love by practicing on her own heart until she understands how much pressure it can bear, how much beauty can be born from breaking. Other figures move in the deeper chambers, each engaged in their own dialogue with eternity. A father scratches lines with a sharp flint, creating patterns that seem to map territories that exist only in the realm of spirit. An old woman uses her fingers to smear clay into shapes that might be animals, might be clouds, might be the dreams of children who never learned to distinguish between waking and sleeping. The cave has become a library of loss, a repository where grief transforms into art, where the temporary nature of flesh gives way to the permanence of stone. Here, in the patient darkness, love learns to speak in languages that time cannot erode, in symbols that will carry meaning long after the cultures that created them have been forgotten by history. The sounds of creation blend into a rhythm that seems to emerge from the heartbeat of the earth itself. Tap, tap, tap of hammer on stone. Scritch, scritch, scritch of flint on rock. The soft whisper of fingers moving through clay. The gentle breath of workers who labor in the sacred space between memory and hope, between what was and what continues to be. These are the first lullabies, sung not to comfort the living, but to honor the dead. Each mark is a note, each pattern a melody, each completed work a song that carries the essence of a lost life into the future. They are lullabies, made of stone, immune to the forgetting that, claim spoken words, resistant to the erosion that wears away all temporary things. The woman pauses in her work, stepping back to study what she has created. In the dancing torchlight, the spiral patterns seem to move, to flow like water, to pulse like a living heart. She sees in them the essence of her daughter, not the physical form that she held so briefly, but the spirit that animated that form, the consciousness that looked out through dark eyes for just long enough to know love, before returning to whatever mystery births all souls. She reaches out and touches the stone, feeling the slight roughness where her hammering has changed the surface of the rock. Under her fingers, the cave wall holds the accumulated warmth of countless hands, the residual heat of all the grief that has been transformed into art within these chambers. It is a warmth that seems to pulse with life, as if the cave itself has become a vast heart that beats with the combined rhythm of all the love that has found expression here. Around her, other workers continue their patient labor. Some create representational images, rough outlines of human figures, animals, the sun and moon and stars. Others work in pure abstraction, letting their grief guide their hands without conscious plan, trusting that meaning will emerge from the marriage of sorrow and stone. But all of them understand that they are engaged in the same fundamental act, the transformation of love into something that can outlast the bodies that contain it. They are writing their hearts on the walls of eternity, leaving messages for generations yet unborn, proof that even in the darkest ages, even when survival consumed every moment of every day, humans found time and energy to create beauty, to make meaning, to insist that some things matter more than mere existence. The torch burns lower, its flame beginning to flicker as it consumes the last of its fuel. But the work continues by feel, by instinct, by the knowledge that comes from repetition, so complete it becomes a part of the soul. Hands move in the darkness, finding their way across the stone's surface by touch alone, adding marks that will remain long after the light has failed, long after the workers have returned to the world above. In the morning, when sunlight streams across the grasslands and life resumes its daily urgency, these chambers will stand quiet and empty. But they will not be silent. The walls themselves will sing with the accumulated voice of all who have labored here. The rhythm of hammer on stone continuing to echo in frequencies too low for human ears, but perfectly audible to human hearts. This is how memory learns to live in stone. This is how love discovers permanence. This is how lullabies are born that can sing forever, carved into the bones of the earth by hands that shake with grief, but steady themselves with purpose, creating beauty from loss, meaning from sorrow, eternity from the brief intersection of human consciousness with the patient endurance of rock. The hammering continues, rhythmic as breathing, steady as heartbeat, endless as the love that drives it. In the darkness of the deep cave, lit only by the failing flame of a dying torch, humanity writes its first songs, creates its first libraries, builds its first monuments to the truth that some things are too important to be lost to time. And in the sound of stone striking stone, in the echo that carries through hidden passages and forgotten chambers, the mountain itself becomes an instrument, playing the music of memory across the vast silence of the ages. A song that will continue long after the last human voice has fallen silent. A lullaby carved in stone that time itself cannot silence. You, yes, you, listening to this voice that carries across the vast ocean of time, you who rest in comfort they could never imagine, surrounded by warmth and safety, and the thousand small miracles they died, hoping their children might someday know. You are the answer to their prayers. You are descended from survivors. Think of it, every person whose genetic material flows through your veins faced the same impossible odds. the same 70% chance that death would claim their children before the first year ended. Every one of your ancestors was either one of the lucky 30% who lived, or one of the parents who somehow, against all probability, managed to keep their children alive long enough to grow, to mate, to pass forward the precious cargo of DNA that eventually became you. You are the descendant of mothers who held their babies through winter storms and singing summers alike, who shared their milk even when their own bodies were failing, who transformed their grief into fierce protection for the children who remained. You carry in your blood the DNA of fathers who hunted when hunting was hopeless, who fought predators with nothing but stone-tipped spears, who chose to feed their families before feeding themselves through seasons of scarcity, so absolute that survival was a daily negotiation with death. You are the child of children who should have died, but didn't. Every breath you take is borrowed from a baby who lived when statistics said they wouldn't. Every heartbeat carries forward the rhythm of a tiny heart that beat against impossible odds. Every thought you think is possible, because somewhere in the vast network of your ancestry, a child who should have been lost to fever, or famine, or the casual cruelty of an indifferent world, instead opened their eyes one more morning, took one more breath, lived one more day, and they were watching for you. Not in any mystical sense, they had no conception of genetics or heredity, no understanding that their survival would echo forward through thousands of generations. But in the deepest sense that matters, every choice they made was made for you. Every risk they took, every sacrifice they accepted, every moment they chose to continue when continuing seemed impossible, all of it was done for the children who had not yet been born, for the future that existed only as hope in their hearts. When the grandmother counted the stones that represented lost children, she was not just mourning the dead. She was celebrating the living, acknowledging that every breath taken by a surviving child was a victory against the vast forces arrayed against human persistence. She was performing a ritual that honored not just what was lost, but what was preserved, what was carried forward, what survived, to become the foundation for all the lives that would follow. You are what survived. In your body, the genetic memory of their struggles lives on. Your immune system carries forward the hard-won resistance to diseases that killed millions of their children. Your brain contains adaptations forged in the crucible of constant threat, patterns of thought that helped your ancestors survive in a world where a moment's inattention could mean death. Your capacity for love, fierce, protective, willing to sacrifice everything for those you care about, is the refined essence of what kept the human species alive through the darkest times. But more than genetics, you carry forward their dreams. Every comfort you take for granted was something they longed for with desperate intensity. The warm bed you sleep in was their vision of paradise. The abundant food in your kitchen was their definition of wealth beyond imagining. The medical care that keeps your children alive was their most fervent prayer to whatever gods might listen. They dreamed you into existence, not the specific you. They could never have imagined the world you inhabit, the technologies that surround you, the problems and possibilities that define your daily existence. But they dreamed the essence of you, a human being who could live without the constant fear of death, who could love without the terrible knowledge that love and loss are inseparable, who could plan for a future that extended beyond the next harsh winter or failed hunt. You are their victory over despair. Every time you hold a child without wondering if they will live to see another season, you fulfill their deepest longing. Every time you plan for years ahead instead of days, you vindicate their faith in the future. Every time you create something beautiful, rather than merely functional, you honor their belief that human existence could be about more than mere survival. They watch you still, not as ghosts or spirits, but as echoes in your DNA, patterns in your thinking, instincts that surface when you least expect them. The way you instinctively protect the vulnerable, the way you create communities for mutual support, and the way you tell stories to make sense of suffering. All of these are gifts from ancestors who learned these lessons through bitter experience and encoded them into the very structure of what it means to be human. You carry their wisdom in your bones. When you feel inexplicably sad at certain times of year, You might be feeling the echo of ancestors who lost children to winter's cruelty. When you are moved to tears by a baby's laughter, you might be experiencing the genetic memory of parents who knew such sounds were precious because they could be silenced so easily. When you fight to protect the innocent, to feed the hungry, to shelter the homeless, you are continuing the work they began when they chose to share scarce resources with the weakest members of their tribes. They live on in your choices. Every act of kindness you perform echoes their decision to care for each other, despite the cost. Every risk you take for love replicates their willingness to sacrifice for their children. Every time you create meaning from suffering, you follow patterns they established when they transformed their grief into art, their loss into ritual, their despair into hope. You are not separate from them. You are their continuation, their vindication, their proof that the struggle was worth it. In your comfortable life, their hardships find meaning. In your capacity for joy, their sorrows are transformed. In your ability to love freely and without fear, their sacrifices bear fruit. So when you feel disconnected from the past, when modern life seems empty of meaning, when the struggles of daily existence seem pointless, remember this: you are the dream of starving mothers made flesh. You are the hope of grieving fathers given form. You are the answer to prayers spoken in languages that have been forgotten for millennia. You are what they fought for when fighting seemed hopeless. You are what they loved when love brought only pain. You are what they built when building seemed impossible. You are their children and their children's children, and their gift to a future they could only imagine. In your breath, their breath continues. In your heartbeat, their hearts still pulse. In your dreams, their hopes find new expression. They are the watchers, and you are what they watched for. You are their victory over death, their triumph over despair, their proof that love is stronger than all the forces that array themselves against it. You are the future they created with their suffering, the paradise they built with their sacrifice, the answer they trusted time to reveal. You are enough. You are worthy. You are the vindication of every prayer they ever whispered into the darkness, every choice they made to continue when continuing broke their hearts, every moment they chose hope over despair. You are their greatest work of art, their finest creation, their love made manifest across the vast distance of time. You are watched. You are loved. You are the living proof that nothing truly important is ever lost. She sits by the fire still, the first mother, the one whose story began this journey through the deep chambers of human memory. Though her body returned to earth countless seasons ago, though her name was never written and her face is lost to time, she remains. Her spirit whispers through every flame that burns in the darkness. In the cave where she labored to bring life into an unforgiving world, the fire pit still holds embers. Not the same fire that particular dance of flame and fuel burned out long ago, but the idea of fire, the necessity of fire, the sacred meaning of fire as the boundary between human and wild, between hope and despair, between the warm circle of love and the vast indifference of the night that fire burns on. She tends it still, in ways that transcend the physical act of adding wood to glowing coals. Every time a mother rises in the night to comfort a crying child, she adds fuel to that eternal flame. Every time a parent sacrifices their own comfort for their baby's need, another log catches and burns bright. Every time love chooses to persist despite pain, despite loss, despite the knowledge that all things pass, the fire grows stronger, its light reaching further into the darkness that surrounds all mortal existence. She was the first, but she was not the last. Her daughter, who lived only long enough to feel the warmth of her mother's arms, became the template for all the children who would follow, countless generations of babies who would know safety she helped create, comfort she helped imagine, love she helped define. In dying so young, that first daughter became eternal, became the archetypal child, whose brief existence validated every effort to protect the vulnerable, to nurture the helpless, to create spaces where innocence could flourish. The mother's grief, transformed by time into something larger than personal loss, became the wellspring from which all protective instincts flow. Her pain, refined by love and tempered by acceptance, became the foundation for every lullaby ever sung, every prayer ever whispered over a sleeping child, every fierce determination to create a world more gentle than the one into which her daughter was born. She learned the hardest lesson, that love's purpose is not to prevent loss, but to create meaning from it. In the cycles of seasons that followed her death, her understanding rippled outward like rings in still water. The women who came after her knew instinctively that motherhood was about more than biology, more than the physical act of bringing children into the world. It was about becoming a guardian of hope itself, a keeper of the flame that makes human existence possible. They learned to mother not just their own children but all children, to see in every baby the face of every baby who had been lost, to understand that the work of nurturing transcends individual families and becomes the work of the species itself. The grandmother who delivered babies in the cave carried forward the first mother's wisdom, encoded now in instinct, transformed from personal experience into collective knowledge. The fire she lit became the hearth around which all human communities gather. Every campfire that brings people together in fellowship traces its lineage back to her first desperate attempt to keep warmth alive in the face of overwhelming cold. Every fireplace that makes a house a home echoes the space she created where love could exist despite danger. Every candle lit in memory of the dead carries forward her understanding that some lights refuse to be extinguished by death. Her whisper travels through the flames, carrying messages that need no words, because they speak directly to the deep structures of the heart. She tells modern mothers that their fears are ancient, their love is eternal, their work continues what she began when she chose to bring a child into a world that offered no guarantees. She reminds them that every act of nurturing is an act of rebellion against the forces that would reduce existence to mere survival. In hospital rooms where machines monitor the heartbeats of premature babies, she is present in the fierce determination of mothers who refuse to let go, who pour their own life force into keeping fragile sparks of consciousness alive. In refugee camps where mothers share insufficient food among too many hungry children, she guides the impossible mathematics of love that somehow divides scarcity into abundance. In quiet nurseries, where parents rock their children to sleep, she hums along with lullabies that carry melodies older than memory. She is the mother of mothers, the first to discover that the heart expands to accommodate love without limit, that grief carves out spaces that can be filled with deeper compassion, that the death of children creates not emptiness, but a fierce commitment to protecting all the children who remain. Her story has no ending, because motherhood has no ending. Each generation rediscovers her truths, faces her challenges, learns her lessons. The specifics change the diseases that threaten children, the dangers they must navigate, the hopes parents hold for their futures, but the essential experience remains constant. Love creates vulnerability. Vulnerability creates fear. Fear creates the determination to fight for what matters most. She watches from every fire that burns in human hands. Her presence felt most strongly in moments of greatest need. When parents sit vigil beside sick children, when communities rally to protect their young, when strangers risk their lives to save babies they have never met, her spirit moves through their actions like wind through flame, encouraging, strengthening, reminding them that they are part of something larger than individual circumstance. The whisper of the fire speaks in the language of heartbeat and breath, of the rhythm that connects all living things to the pulse of existence itself. It tells of continuity that transcends mortality, of patterns that repeat across generations, of love that learns to express itself through countless individuals while remaining, essentially, unchanged. She was the first to understand that children belong not just to their parents, but to the future itself, that every baby born carries forward the accumulated hopes of all who came before. In her loss, she discovered that even the briefest life contributes to the great work of consciousness, discovering itself, of love learning to recognize its own face in the faces of those it has created. Her daughter, who knew only warmth and comfort before returning to the mystery from which all life emerges, became the first to teach that some forms of love are too pure for the world to contain, that some souls come only to remind others of what matters most. In her brief existence, that first daughter showed that meaning is not measured in duration, but in the depth of love she inspired, the grief that transformed into wisdom, the hope that burned brighter after her flame was extinguished, the fire whispers on, carrying their story forward through time, connecting the first mother to every mother who has ever held a child close, understood that she holds the future in her arms. It speaks of the eternal nature of the maternal instinct, the way love finds expression across cultures and centuries, the truth that some bonds are stronger than death itself, in the whisper of every flame, in the voice that speaks without words but is understood by every parent who has ever feared for their child's safety. The first mother continues her work. She tends the fire that keeps hope alive, that transforms individual love into universal compassion, that reminds humanity again and again that the work of nurturing is the most important work of all. Her fire burns in every heart that chooses love despite its cost, that creates warmth despite the cold, that refuses to let the light go out, despite all the forces arrayed against it. She is the whisper in the flame, the warmth in the ashes, the spark that ignites every time a parent looks at their child and vows to create a world worthy of such innocent trust. And in that whisper, in that warmth, in that spark, the eternal dance continues, love creating consciousness, consciousness discovering love, the fire of human awareness burning bright against the vast darkness, tended always by those who understand that some lights are too important to let die. The sun rises as it has risen for 4.5 billion years. As it rose on the first day when consciousness flickered to life in the caves and grasslands, as it will rise long after the last human voice falls silent, and the earth spins on in its ancient dance around the star that makes all life possible. But this dawn is different. This dawn carries within its light the accumulated warmth of every fire that has ever been lit against the darkness, every flame that has pushed back against the cold, every spark that has refused to be extinguished by wind or rain or the vast indifference of space. This dawn holds the glow of love made visible, of hope given form, of the human refusal to accept that meaning ends with mortality. In the golden light that spills across the awakening world, the spirits of all who have gone before gather to witness this moment, not as ghosts or apparitions, but as the living essence of what they contributed to the great work of consciousness discovering itself. They are present in the way light moves across landscape, in the gentle warming that makes growth possible, in the promise that each new day carries within it. The first mother stands among them, her arms holding not just her own daughter, but all the children who have ever lived, who have ever died, who have ever been loved beyond the capacity of words to express. In the dawn light, her face holds the accumulated wisdom of every mother who has ever faced loss and chosen to love again, who has ever transformed grief into protection for those who remain. Her daughter dances in the light itself, no longer bound by the fragile flesh that could not survive the harsh realities of the world into which she was born. She has become pure joy, untainted by suffering, free to embody all the happiness she was denied in her brief, mortal existence. Around her, countless other children play in realms where laughter needs no reason and peace requires no effort. The grandmother who counted stones sits in contemplation, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her eyes reflecting the knowledge that comes only from having witnessed the full cycle of life and death many times over. She watches the dawn with the satisfaction of one who has done her work well, who has passed on the essential wisdom, who has helped ensure that love continues despite all the forces arrayed against it. The hunter who drew patterns on cave walls adds new images to the gallery of memory. Spirals of light that capture the movement of souls from one realm to another, maps of territories that exist beyond the reach of earthly feet. His art has become part of the dawn itself, patterns written in light across the sky, stories told in clouds and wind, and the way morning mist rises from valleys where his people once walked. All of them together, the vast assembly of those who loved and lost and learned and died, gather in the warmth of this dawn to bear witness to what their lives created. They see in the rising sun the vindication of every choice they made to continue when continuing seemed impossible, every decision to bring children into an uncertain world, every act of love performed despite the knowledge that all love leads eventually to loss. They see you, the descendant of survivors, the inheritor of their dreams, the living proof that their struggles were not in vain. In your breath, their hopes find fulfillment. In your heartbeat, their love continues its eternal rhythm. In your capacity for joy despite sorrow, for hope despite uncertainty, for love despite its inevitable cost, their greatest work reaches its completion. The dawn speaks to you across the vast distance of time, carrying messages that need no translation, because they are written in the language of the heart itself. It tells you that you are loved beyond measure, that your existence is the answer to prayers spoken in languages that have been forgotten, that your life gives meaning to deaths that occurred before recorded history began. It reminds you that grief is not the opposite of love, but its deepest expression, that loss is not the absence of meaning, but the space where meaning lives most fully, that death is not the end of relationship, but its transformation into something that can survive the dissolution of flesh and the passage of time. In the growing light, the boundaries between past and present begin to dissolve. The cave where the first mother labored exists now, eternal, a sacred space where new consciousness continues to emerge from the mystery that surrounds all existence. The fire that kept her tribe alive burns still, tended by invisible hands, fed by the love of all who understand that some lights must never be allowed to die. The children who died too young are not lost but transformed, not absent but present in every child who lives, not forgotten but remembered in the fierce protectiveness that drives parents to create safer worlds, more gentle realities, more nurturing environments, where innocence can flourish and joy can flow unobstructed by the harsh necessities that once defined human existence. The dawn reveals that nothing truly important is ever lost, that love creates its own continuity, that consciousness once awakened cannot simply cease. It shows that every tear shed in grief waters the ground from which new hope grows, that every heart broken by loss becomes capable of deeper compassion, that every soul touched by mortality discovers within itself the capacity for love that transcends the boundaries of individual existence. As the sun climbs higher, painting the world in shades of gold and amber and the warm colors of renewed possibility, the message becomes clear. You are part of an unbroken chain of being that stretches back to the first spark of awareness and forward to futures that exist now only as potential in the great dance of becoming. Your breath is their breath continuing. Your love is their love finding new expression. Your hope is their hope vindicated by time itself. The dawn completes the circle, connects ending to beginning, transforms the long night of struggle into morning, illuminated by understanding. In its light, the ancient truth becomes visible, that consciousness is love discovering itself, that love is consciousness expressing its deepest nature, that the fire which burns in human hearts is the same fire that lights the stars and warms the worlds, where life learns to recognize its own infinite value. Rest now in this understanding. Sleep comes gently to those who know they are held by love larger than any individual existence, watched over by those who have gone before, connected to those who will come after. In your dreams, walk with them in meadows, where no goodbye is ever final, where every reunion lasts forever, where the children who knew only brief moments of earthly love discover the eternal joy that was always their true destination. The dawn fades into day, day will fade into dusk, dusk into night, night into dawn again, the endless cycle that carries consciousness forward through time, each rotation bringing new opportunities for love to discover itself, for hope to find expression, for the great work of awareness to continue its patient exploration of what it means to exist, to feel, to care, to create meaning from the raw material of experience. Sleep, rest, let the rhythm of your breathing join the eternal rhythm that connects all living things to the pulse of existence itself. You are safe in the knowledge that you are loved, that your life matters, that your story continues theirs and prepares the way for those who will continue yours. In the whisper of your breath, their voices live on. In the beating of your heart, their love finds its truest expression. In the peace that settles over you now, their gift to the future, the gift of consciousness capable of love capable of transcending mortality, reaches its perfect fulfillment. Dawn, always the promise of light returning after darkness, of warmth following cold, of hope emerging from despair. Always the possibility of beginning again, of love finding new ways to express itself, of the eternal fire burning bright in the sanctuary of the human heart. Rest now. The watchers keep their vigil. The fire burns on. The dawn will come again.